Around 1200 BCE, the Mediterranean was a globalized world. Powerful empires, the Egyptians, the Hittites in Turkey, and the Mycenaeans in Greece, dominated a shared landscape. We see the scale of their wealth in ruins like the Karnak temple complex in Egypt. The time, labor, and engineering required to raise these columns points to a society with deep resources and highly organized central leadership. These empires functioned as nodes in an expansive international trade network, fueled by a constant demand for the copper and tin required to forge bronze. This is a bronze oxide ingot. Ancient merchants standardized the shape of raw metal into these distinct four-cornered slabs to streamline transport in the hulls of ships. Thousands of these moved across the sea to feed the military and agricultural needs of every major kingdom. No kingdom was an island. The cities of Syria acted as regional hubs, while Cyprus supplied the bulk of the copper. This created a state of total interdependence, where the survival of one nation relied on the stability of the others. Then, in the span of roughly 50 years, nearly every major center in this network burned to the ground. Great port cities were reduced to ash, and international trade halted. Populations plummeted, and in many regions, the ability to read and write disappeared for centuries. This happened without a single superior empire rising to conquer the others. The destruction was general, leaving behind a vacuum where a thriving world used to be. History suggests that the same integration that allowed these kingdoms to flourish also created a shared vulnerability. The tight connections between these nations meant that a problem in one area could quickly become a problem for everyone. Archaeologist Eric Cline uses complexity theory to explain this event. Highly complex systems are resilient, but they can fail rapidly when they are hit by multiple heavy stressors simultaneously. Modern data from tree rings and lake pollen confirms the first major stressor. Around 1200 BCE, a severe drought struck the Mediterranean, and in some regions, the dry spell lasted for generations. This lack of rain led to agricultural failures on a scale the regional trade network couldn't manage. With wheat and barley crops dying off, famine spread through the interdependent empires. While the ground was parched, it was also shaking. The Mediterranean sits on active fault lines, and scientists have identified an earthquake storm, decades of continuous seismic activity that leveled vital infrastructure. Facing collapsed cities and empty grain silos, the populations of these empires turned on their leaders. Physical evidence shows palaces were often burned from the inside by their own people during violent internal rebellions. Individually, a drought or an earthquake might be managed. However, the overlapping timing of these events weakened the economic and social foundations of the entire ancient world. A final external threat appeared in the form of the Sea Peoples. These groups arrived on ships with their families, acting as climate refugees who used wading and piracy to secure new homes. This carving from the temple at Medinet Habu shows Egyptian forces fighting to repel these migrating groups. The images depict the chaotic and overwhelming nature of the conflict. These arrivals disrupted the maritime trade routes that the empires depended on. Without these routes, the flow of food and materials between nations effectively stopped. In the ruins of Ugarit, archaeologists found letters baked in the fire that destroyed the city. This cuneiform tablet is a plea from the king, begging for military help from allies. The city was destroyed before the letter could be sent. Severed trade routes triggered a multiplier effect. An empire hit by an earthquake could no longer import grain. A king facing a rebellion could no longer import the tin required to forge bronze weapons for his army. The environmental and internal crises pulled at the system's foundation, until the loss of trade caused the entire civilization to seize up and shatter into disconnected pieces. The following centuries were a period of regression. Magnificent palaces were replaced by small, isolated villages, and the monumental construction of the Bronze Age ceased entirely. With no international tin arriving to make bronze, survivors adapted to their environment. They learned to forge tools and weapons from iron, a metal that was difficult to work but abundant across the local landscape. The loss of the old scripts also forced innovation in communication. The Phoenicians created a simpler writing system based on sounds rather than symbols. This artifact shows the characters that would eventually evolve into our modern alphabet. Over hundreds of years, this forced reset paved the way for the Archaic period and the rise of classical Greece. New cities emerged with different social structures and better suited technologies. While complex systems can fail, survivors often use the rubble to build new structures better suited to the environment. The end of the Bronze Age was a total collapse, but it was also a beginning. Today, we operate on a global supply chain that is significantly larger, yet its architecture mirrors the ancient Mediterranean network. Modern societies face their own environmental pressures, including resource shortages and shifting weather patterns that threaten global food supplies. Our deep interdependence is the defining characteristic of our world. We rely on a global web for everything from energy to basic medical supplies, mirroring the fragility of the late Bronze Age. The history of this collapse suggests that highly optimized systems are only as stable as the climate and cooperation that support them. Maintaining our modern world requires the active protection of those same foundations.